Before today's video starts, we have a quick word from our sponsor, Amino. Amino is an amazing social media app that allows you to build and join communities about nearly every topic on Earth. This includes true crime, comic books, K-pop, creepypasta, and so much more. Recently, Amino launched a new feature called Stories, which allows users to create short narrative videos. Criminally Listed is creating exclusive material for Amino Stories. For our first story, we cover the horrifying 1984 murder of Derek Roby. The only thing more shocking than Derek's murder is the identity of the person who killed him. You can only watch this story on the Amino app. Amino is free to download and is available on both iOS and Android. You can find the story in our profile by following the link in the description box below this video. Or you can search for our profile in the Amino app. Our username is Criminally Listed. And make sure you follow us and press the button for notifications because we'll be doing more stories in the future. So please download Amino today and check out our latest story. And don't forget to follow us so you can watch upcoming stories. Number 2. The Village of the Damned. Dryden is a small town in New York's Finger Lakes region. Because of a string of grisly murders and untimely deaths that happened over a decade, the town has been called the Village of the Damned. Because of all the tragic deaths, some people think that the town was cursed. In 1989, Dryden had a population of just over 13,000 people. One family that lived in the town was the Harris family. The family consisted of 39-year-old Warren Harris, his 41-year-old wife, Dolores, and their children, 15-year-old Shelby and 11-year-old Mark. Warren was a sales manager for an electronics company, and Dolores owned a craft and antique shop. They lived in an upscale hamlet of Dryden called Ellis Hollow. The hamlet was home to about 150 families who lived on large tracts of land with lots of privacy. It was a quiet hamlet in a quiet town. Many residents did not lock their doors. On the morning of December 23, 1989, one of the Harris' neighbors called 911. The Harris' house was on fire. The fire department came and they put the fire out. They made a gruesome discovery inside the house. It was the dead bodies of the Harrises. The bodies of Warren, Dolores, and their son Mark were found in one room. They had been bound to chairs and pillowcases were put over their heads. They had all been shot in the back of the head with a .22 caliber handgun. Shelby's body was found in a different room. She had been sexually assaulted and then she was shot once in the head. The medical examiner thought that the family had been killed sometime between 6 p.m. and 10:15 p.m. the night before their bodies were found. Troop C of the New York State Troopers were the investigators on the case. The state troopers thought that the killer may have stayed in the house until 6 a.m., just before the fire was discovered. At first, the police weren't sure what the motive was. The family didn't have any enemies, so the state troopers didn't know why someone would execute them 3 days before Christmas. Then they looked at Warren and Dolores' credit card transactions. On the same day that their bodies were found, their credit cards were used at stores in the nearby cities of Syracuse and Auburn. Someone had purchased diamonds, electronics, and clothes. In total, 6 purchases, valued at $1,334, were made. The state troopers interviewed employees of the stores where the purchases were made. The employee said that a black man in his mid-30s used the credit cards. The state troopers had 8 eyewitnesses talk to a sketch artist and it resulted in 8 different sketches. Some witnesses said that woman, who was also black but a little bit older than the man, also made some purchases using Dolores Harris's credit card. About 5 weeks after the murders, the police got a tip that 33-year-old Michael King might be the killer. The state troopers watched Michael for about a week, and then on February 8, 1990, they went to arrest him at his mother's apartment. Using a battering ram, they knocked down the door of the apartment. When the state troopers entered the apartment, Michael was pointing a shotgun under his chin. He then turned the gun on the state troopers and fired once. The state troopers returned fire and Michael was hit. He died a short time later. Michael's mother, Shirley King, was arrested in the raid. The state troopers were convinced that Shirley was involved in the murders, or at least the aftermath. Shirley admitted that she used Dolores Harris's credit card. She said that her son had given it to her. She said she only used it before she learned about the murders. Shirley swore that she had nothing to do with the murders or the fire. Shirley was charged with 9 felonies, which included burglary, arson, and hindering the prosecution. The state troopers said that they had one piece of evidence that tied Shirley to the crime scene. It was a gas can that belonged to the Harrises that was found near their bodies. The state troopers claimed they found fingerprints on it, and they were Shirley's fingerprints. Shirley King went to trial in the autumn of 1990. The fingerprints on the gas can was the prosecution's key piece of evidence. Shirley's trial lasted for 3 months, and then the jury deliberated for 11 hours. She was found guilty on all charges. She was sentenced to 18 to 44 years in prison. Then in 1991, there was an odd twist in the case. One of the state troopers who investigated the crime, David Harding, was recruited by the Central Intelligence Agency, which is better known by its acronym, the CIA. Part of the recruitment process was that he was interviewed by an agent while he was hooked up to a polygraph machine. He was told if he admitted to committing any crimes, there would be an investigation and he could be charged. During the interview, Harding was asked if he would ever break the law to help his country. In response, Harding bragged about fabricating evidence while working with the state troopers. He boasted that he created evidence when they knew someone was guilty. He said that in one case, he lied about the amount of cocaine that was in a man's possession. This resulted in a harsher sentence for the man. Harding also admitted that he stole $1,000 from a drug raid. After the interview, the CIA told the United States Department of Justice what Harding had admitted to. But amazingly, 14 months went by before anything was done about it. The delay was blamed on an oversight in the Justice Department. In early 1992, the Justice Department started investigating Troop C. One of the first cases they looked at was the murder of the Harrises. It turned out that Harding had lifted fingerprints from Shirley King's workplace and then attached the fingerprints to an evidence card. He then claimed that the fingerprints were found on the gas can. In August 1992, Shirley's lawyer filed a motion to vacate her conviction. The motion was granted, and she was given a new trial. She was released on bond while she awaited her trial. Since she had already spent 2.5 years in prison because of false evidence, the district attorney chose not to prosecute her. Shirley moved to New Jersey after she was released, and then she sued the state of New York for $500 million. She won a settlement of $250,000. The investigation into Troop C took 4 years. Thousands of cases were reviewed. The Justice Department found 36 cases where fingerprints were planted and 10 more cases that could have been tainted. The Justice Department thought that at least 6 troopers had fabricated evidence. 5 of them ended up serving jail time, and 1 was acquitted. David Harding, whose admissions to the CIA launched the investigation, was sentenced to 4 to 12 years in prison. When Harding was asked why he bragged about manufacturing the evidence, he explained that he was being recruited for the anti-terrorism unit. He said that they told him, "We don't want Inquirer or altar boys, and we don't want any Boy Scouts." The Troop C scandal was the biggest scandal in the history of the New York State Police. The supposed curse of Dryden struck again about 3.5 years after the murders of the Harrises. In the early 1990s, Paul Jackson, who grew up in Dryden, was living in Virginia. That is where he met Colleen Mumma. They dated for 1.5 years, and then they moved to a trailer park in Dryden. In July 1993, Mumma broke up with Jackson. Mumma started moving her stuff from the trailer to an apartment just down the road. She moved her possessions in sporadic trips throughout July and early August. Jackson was hoping that he and Mumma were going to get back together. He wanted to marry Mumma and start a family. But then, in the first week of August, Mumma told Jackson something he did not want to hear. She was dating someone else. It was their mutual friend, 26-year-old Scott Hume. Hume lived in the same trailer park as Jackson and Mumma. Hume frequently had barbecued and had drinks with Jackson and Mumma. Jackson was devastated by the news. On August 14, 1993, Paul Jackson, who was 26, went to Mumma's apartment. The door was unlocked, so he let himself into the apartment. He found Hume and Mumma sleeping on a couch. Jackson picked up a butcher knife and stabbed Hume once in the chest. Then, knife in hand, he ran away from the apartment, got into his car, and drove away. Mumma woke up and started screaming. 911 was called, and Hume was rushed to the hospital. But sadly, shortly after arriving at the hospital, 26-year-old Scott Hume was pronounced dead. About an hour after the stabbing, Jackson turned himself in. He was charged with intentional second-degree murder, second-degree felony murder, and first-degree manslaughter. He went to trial in February 1994, and he pleaded not guilty. He said that he just wanted to hurt Hume, and he had no intention of killing him. He was found guilty of second-degree felony murder and first-degree manslaughter, but he was found not guilty of intentional second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. The next chapter, the supposed curse, started to unfold 10 months after Paul Jackson's trial. The Starr family lived in Cortlandville, which is a township just outside of Dryden. At the end of 1994, Stephen Starr was 42 years old. He taught 6th grade at Dryden Elementary and he was the coach of the Dryden High School football team. He was married to a woman named Judy, and they had 3 daughters. Amy and Amber, who were twins, were 17 years old, and Tiffany was 15 years old. All 3 girls attended Dryden High, and they were popular. They were all cheerleaders. In the fall of 1994, Amber started dating 20-year-old Jonathan P. Merchant. They dated for a few months, and then Amber broke it off. Merchant desperately wanted to get back together with Amber, but his attempts to reconcile soon became stalking. Then, just after Christmas 1994, Merchant threatened to kill Amber's new boyfriend. When Merchant made the threat, Amber's father, Stephen, was out of town playing in a basketball tournament. On December 27th, Amber and her mother, Judy, went to the sheriff's office and filed an order of protection against Merchant. Merchant was arrested that day. He was released the next day after his family posted $500 bail. Hours after Merchant was released, he called and threatened Amber. Judy went back to the sheriff's office and asked to have an officer watch their house. The sheriff's office sent an officer to sit in front of their house. An officer watched the family's home on December 29th as well. But when his shift was over, he left and no one replaced him. Later that same night, Stephen returned home from his basketball tournament and he went to bed. Several hours later, in the early morning of December 30th, Merchant walked up to the back door of the family's home. Using a 20-gauge shotgun, he shot the lock off the door and entered the Stars' home. He went directly to Amy's bedroom. Stephen went to protect his daughter, and Merchant shot him twice. The rest of the Star family made it out of the house safely, and they ran to a neighbor's home. Stephen left the house and drove to the cemetery. 3 years earlier, Merchant was in high school, and he was dating a fellow student. While they were dating, his girlfriend took her own life. Merchant went to her grave and killed himself by shooting himself in the head. 42-year-old Stephen Starr was rushed to the hospital, but sadly, he died from his wounds. His family considers him a hero who died protecting them. Another family that was devastated by the supposed curse was the Pace family. Billy and Scott Pace both attended Dryden High. Both boys were popular and they were star athletes. They both played on the Dryden High football team, and Stephen Starr had been their coach. In the spring of 1995, Billy graduated from Dryden High. On August 20th, 1995, he was riding in a car and collided with a highway sign. Billy Pace, who was 19 years old, was killed in the accident. On September 10th, 1996, just over a year after Billy died, Billy's brother, Scott, attended football practice. After practice, he was getting a ride to his girlfriend's house. As they were driving, a pickup truck backed out onto the road in front of them, and the pickup truck Scott was riding in collided with it. Scott, who was 17, did not survive the collision. 2 weeks after Scott died, the town experienced another horrifying loss. In the first week of September 1996, 29-year-old Robert Bergman, his wife, and their 2 daughters moved into a house they just purchased in Dryden. Bergman was the supervisor of the reconditioning shop at a car dealership in Dryden. On the morning of September 14, 1996, Bergman went to work. Another employee at the dealership was 28-year-old Edward Bailey. Bergman was not Bailey's direct supervisor. They did not even work in the same department. But Bergman supposedly bossed Bailey around and chastised him at times. Bailey did not like the way that Bergman treated him, and he had complained to his supervisor. On the morning of September 14, 1996, Bailey and Bergman got into an argument. Bailey went home and grabbed his 20-gauge shotgun. He returned to the dealership and shot 29-year-old Robert Bergman to death. After killing the husband and father of two, Bailey went and told a co-worker, and the police were called. Bailey was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. He went to trial in February 1997. His lawyer had several psychologists testify. They all said that Bailey had a personality disorder. They also said that, at the time of the murder, he was under extreme distress. He was worried that Bergman was going to get him fired. Bailey liked his job, and without it, he wasn't sure if he would be able to support his family. The jury ended up acquitting Bailey of second-degree murder, but they did find him guilty of first-degree manslaughter. He was sentenced to 12.5 years to 25 years in prison. While all this was going on, the Starr family was trying their best to move on with their lives. Amber and Amy graduated from Dryden High, and they moved away to college. Tiffany became the head of the Dryden High cheerleading team. The cheerleading team was a major source of pride for the town. For 12 consecutive years, they won the cheerleading championship. On October 11, 1996, Dryden High had a football game. It was an emotional game because only 3 weeks earlier, their teammate, Scott Pace, was killed in a car accident. The cheerleaders had a problem when it came time to do their routines. Two of their teammates, Jennifer Baldock and Sarah Haney, who were both 16, didn't show up for the game. The rest of the cheerleading team was concerned because neither of them had ever missed a game. Little did they know, but the police had been called to Sarah Haney's home. Sarah's parents were out of town, and the night before the game, Jennifer had slept at their house. Some of Sarah's family had gone to check on her, and they were disturbed by what they found in the bathroom. There clearly had been a struggle. The shower curtain had been torn down, and the shower soap dish was broken. Both Sarah and Jennifer's cheerleader outfits were in the house, but the girls were nowhere to be found. The police discovered that the Haney's car was missing. It was found abandoned about 4 miles from the Haney's home. The police forced the trunk open, and they found evidence that the girls had been in the trunk. One of the first people the police interviewed was a man who lived next door to the Haneys, 31-year-old John Andrews. From a window in an upstairs bedroom in Andrews' house, you could see directly into the Haney's bathroom where there had been a struggle. Andrews had served in the Air Force, and he had been stationed in Germany. While he was stationed there, he attacked 2 women while he was wearing a ski mask. He was charged with assault. He was dishonorably discharged, and he served time at the United States Penitentiary, Leavenworth. After he got out of prison, he moved to the Dryden area and got a job as a lathe operator. He told the police he did not know what happened to the girls. About 48 hours after Jennifer and Sarah went missing, a woman called the police and told them that she had found a puddle of blood on the floor of her hunting cabin. The cabin was less than 40 miles away from where the girls were kidnapped. It turned out that the woman who called about the blood was John Andrews' sister. The police started searching in the area around the cabin, and they found some of Sarah and Jennifer's body parts. They found more body parts scattered along the road leading up to the cabin. The police never publicly discussed what happened to the girls, except to say that they were tortured and dismembered. John Andrews was arrested and charged with their murders. On November 2, 1996, about a month after the girls were kidnapped, Andrews hanged himself in his jail cell. Sadly, this gruesome double murder was not the end of Dryden's bad luck. Katie Savino was a classmate and close friend of Sarah and Jennifer. She was also a member of the Dryden High cheerleading team. Savino graduated in 1998, and she went to State University of New York. On June 11, 1999, Savino was back in Dryden. She went out to a bar that was just outside of Dryden with her friend, Cheryl Thayer. After having several drinks, Savino, 3 male friends, and Thayer got into a car. Thayer, who was 19, was driving, and she was intoxicated. She blew a stop sign on a country road, and a truck collided with their car. Everyone in the car, except for Katie Savino, got out alive. She was just 19 years old. Thayer was sentenced to 6 months in prison. The sad final chapter of the supposed curse happened 3 months after Katie Savino was killed. Mike Fott was a close friend of Savino. He had played linebacker for Dryden High. He played with Scott Pace, and he was coached by Steven Starr. One day in August 1999, Fott walked into the woods, and using a shotgun, he took his own life. Mike Fott was 19 years old when he died. From 1989 to 1999, 15 people living in the Dryden area died violent and untimely deaths. For this reason, many people believe that Dryden was cursed. Other people think that the cluster of deaths was just a tragic statistical anomaly. Many of the residents who lived through Dryden's dark days have tried to move on with their lives, but they said that they have some scars that will never heal. Number 1. The Curse of the Little Rascals. In September 1922, the first film in the Our Gang series was released. The short silent film was the start of one of the most successful comedy franchises in history. The film series featured the adventures of a group of children who lived in a poor neighborhood. The series was created by film producer Hal Roach. In total, there was 220 short films, and they featured 167 child actors. In 1955, 80 of the short films, which were all talkies, were syndicated for television and broadcast under the title The Little Rascals. There are rumors that the cast of the series was cursed. Proponents of the curse point out that several stars of the show died young and untimely deaths. For example, in 1936, Norman Chaney, who played the character Chubby in 19 of the films, died after an operation. He was just 21 years old. William Robert Laughlin, who portrayed the character Froggy from 1940 to 1944, was killed at the age of 16 in a scooter accident. Or there's Bobby Hutchinson. He played the character Weezer from 1927 to 1933. In May 1945, he was training to be a pilot for the Army. He died at the age of 20 after a mid-air collision during a training exercise. These are just a few examples of cast members who died young. Several other cast members died from health problems and accidents before the age of 65. But some other cast members, or people very close to them, died in very violent ways. Harold Switzer was born in January 1925 in Paris, Illinois. 2.5 years later, his brother Carl was born. In 1934, Harold, Carl, and the rest of their family were on vacation in Los Angeles, California. While they were on their vacation, they visited Hal Roach Studios, which launched the careers of Will Rogers and Laurel and Hardy. It was also the studio that produced the Our Gang films. During their visit to the studio, the family stopped off at the cafeteria, which was open to the public. In the cafeteria, Harold and Carl started singing and dancing. Our Gang creator Hal Roach saw them perform, and he was impressed. He offered both of them roles in Our Gang films. For the Our Gang films, Harold was given the nicknames Deadpan and Slim. Carl's character was named Alfalfa. Harold and Carl first appeared in the short film Beginner's Luck, which was released in February 1935. Alfalfa proved to be a fan favorite, and he became one of the main characters of the series. Nearly 85 years after his debut, Alfalfa is the most recognizable character from the Little Rascals. He is known for his cowlick and for singing off-key. Harold did not have as much success, and he became a background character. Harold appeared in over 30 Our Gang films. After he left the series in 1940, he stayed away from the film industry. Carl was in twice as many films as his brother, but he also left the series in 1940 at the age of 12. Unlike his brother, Carl continued to work as an actor, but he struggled to get roles. The problem was that since he was so famous for being Alfalfa, he was typecast. When he did land a role, it was usually a minor one. After failing for years to get steady work in the film industry, he tried to get roles on TV shows, but once again, he did not have much luck. As an adult, Carl worked several part-time jobs because his acting didn't generate enough income. Also, he didn't receive any residuals from his work on Our Gang. In 1954, when Carl was 27, he went on a blind date with a woman named Diantha Collingwood. They were married 3 months later. In the mid-1950s, Carl was still having problems finding acting work, so he decided to stop pursuing that career. In 1955, Carl and Diantha moved to Diantha's family farm in Pretty Prairie, Wisconsin. At the time, Diantha was pregnant. Carl told his friends that he planned to be a farmer. But Carl did not have any experience working on a farm, and he found the work very difficult. Not long after they relocated, Diantha gave birth to a son. In 1957, Carl and Diantha got divorced, and Carl moved back to the Los Angeles area. In 1958, Carl got a supporting role in the movie The Defiant Ones, which starred Sidney Poitier and Tony Curtis. Carl finished filming his scenes in early 1959. While Carl looked for his next role, he worked 2 part-time jobs. He was a bartender, and he worked for his godfather, the legendary singer and actor Roy Rogers. Rogers owned a business that took celebrities bear hunting. Carl worked as a guide on the hunting expeditions. For the bear hunting business, Carl borrowed a dog from his friend, Moses Stilts. But not long after Carl got the dog, it ran away. Carl put up posters offering a reward for the dog's return. A few days after the dog ran away, a man called Carl and told him he found the dog. Carl had the man bring the dog to the bar where he worked. He paid the man $35 and he gave him $15 worth of drinks. A couple weeks went by and Carl was out of money. At the same time that Carl was suffering financial hardship, the R Gang films were in television syndication under the title The Little Rascals. The show was immensely popular, and Alfalfa was one of the most famous characters on television. The show was generating millions of dollars in revenue. But Carl saw none of the money because he was not contractually entitled to any residuals. In the weeks after Carl got the dog back, he drank heavily. He also began to think that, even though he was the one who lost the dog, Moses Stilts should have paid the reward to get the dog back. On January 21, 1958, Carl and his friend, Jack Pyatt, were drinking. They decided to go collect the money from Stilts. There are 3 different versions as to what happened when they got there. What is known is that when the police arrived, Carl was bleeding from a gunshot wound in his crotch. He was rushed to the hospital, but he was pronounced dead on arrival. When he died, Carl Alfalfa Switzer was 31 years old. Stilts had a black eye, and Pyatt was unharmed. The police interviewed Stilts, and he gave them one version of what happened. He said that Carl and Pyatt came to his door and started pounding on it. Carl told him to open the door or he would kick it down. Stilts said that he opened the door and saw that Carl and Pyatt were drunk. Carl and Pyatt stepped inside, and Carl demanded $50 to reimburse him for the money he paid for the reward to get the dog back. Accounting for inflation, in 2019, that is about $440. Stilts said that they got into an argument and Pyatt hit him in the head with a domed glass clock. Stilts said that is how he got the black eye. Stilts said he went to a dresser and pulled out a .38 caliber revolver out of a drawer. Stilts said that he and Carl fought over the gun and the gun went off. The bullet went into the ceiling and no one was hurt. Stilts said that Carl got control of the gun, but he was able to wrestle it back. Stilts claimed that Carl then pulled out a knife, which he described as a switchblade. Stilts said that Carl threw the knife at him and then he fired the fatal gunshot. Stilts claimed he was acting in self-defense. The police found a penknife on the floor in the area where Carl collapsed from his wound. Pyatt had a slightly different story. He said that Stilts did not act in self-defense. He claimed that when Stilts shot Carl, Carl was unarmed. Pyatt said that the only reason he got out of the house alive was because he begged for his life. The day after the shooting, Moses Stilts was booked on suspicion of murder. 4 days later, he testified in front of the coroner's jury and told his version of what happened the night Carl died. The jury decided that he acted in self-defense, and the charges against him were dropped. Carl Switzer died on the same day as famed director Cecil B. DeMille. As a result, Carl's death received little attention in the news. People believe that this is just more evidence that the cast of the Little Rascals was cursed. 42 years after Carl's death, a third version of what happened on the night he died emerged. In 2001, a 56-year-old man named Tom Corrigan was interviewed by a reporter with a Newswire service. Tom is the son of actor and stuntman Ray Crash Corrigan. His stepdad was Moses Stilts. Tom told the reporter that he was in the house on the night that Carl was killed. He claimed that Carl was murdered and that his stepfather did not act in self-defense. He said that Carl knocked on their door and he said he was from Western Union. Tom said that his stepfather instantly recognized Carl's voice. Tom said that Stilts went and grabbed his gun. Then Stilts let Carl into the house and they fought over the gun. The gun fired and the bullet entered the ceiling. Tom said he was hit in the leg with a piece of plaster from the ceiling. After the first shot was fired, Tom said that his sisters ran to his neighbor's house to get some help. Tom said that he started to walk out of the house himself. Tom said that when Carl saw he was hurt, he realized how serious the situation had become, and he told Pyatt that they should leave. Tom told the reporter, as he was walking out of the house, he heard a second gunshot. He turned around and he saw Carl slump against the wall in the hallway. Beside him was an unopened penknife. Tom said that was the first time he saw the penknife. He thought that the penknife might have fallen out of Carl's pocket when he slumped against the wall. Tom said that Stilts then turned the gun towards Pyatt. Pyatt begged for his life. Tom's mother, Rhea Corrigan, stepped between them, and Pyatt was able to leave the house unharmed. After the article was published, Tom was interviewed by a police officer, and he was asked if he would testify in front of the coroner's jury. Tom agreed, but he never ended up testifying. If Moses Stilts did murder Carl, it was too late for him to face justice. Moses had died in May 1983 at the age of 62. Every Christmas, up until the year he died, Stilts would get a card in the mail. They were always signed Alfie. The identity of the person who sent the cards is unknown. Carl's brother, Harold Switzer, also did not escape the supposed curse. When Harold was in his 40s, he owned a laundromat with a man named Michael Izzo. At times, their relationship was turbulent, and they would argue. On April 14, 1967, just 8 years after his brother was shot to death, Harold, who was 42, and Izzo, who was 29, were drinking together at the home of Izzo's father. They got into an argument, and Harold shot him multiple times. Izzo died as a result of his wounds. Hours later, Harold shot himself in a remote area near Glendale, California. Another victim of the supposed curse was Scott Beckett. Beckett was born in October 1929 in Oakland, California. When he was 3 years old, he was visiting his father in the hospital. To make his father feel better, Beckett sang to him. A film producer heard him sing, and he told Beckett's parents that he should audition for movies. Beckett's first role was in the 1933 movie Gallant Lady. After appearing in the movie, Hal Roach hired Beckett to act in Our Gang. Beckett's character's trademark was wearing a baseball hat that was always askew and an oversized sweater. Beckett appeared in 15 Our Gang films, often in the role of the best friend of one of the main characters, Spanky. He left the series in 1935, and he continued to get film roles as a teenager. He played young Al Jolson in the Al Jolson Story, and he played a younger version of Ali Baba in Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. His most notable post-Our Gang role was on the sci-fi show Rocky Jones, Space Ranger. It was a supporting role, but it was steady work for Beckett. The show ran for 2 seasons. The older Beckett got, the harder it was for him to find roles. In the early 1950s, he started to drink heavily and do drugs. In February 1954, the police were called to a hotel in Los Angeles. An armed man had robbed the night clerk of $137. Hours later, Beckett was found asleep in a shower in the basement of the hotel. The police searched his car and found a loaded rifle. Beckett claimed he didn't rob the night clerk. He said he had been driving and he was exhausted, so he went to the hotel's basement to sleep. The clerk was not able to identify Beckett as the robber, so he wasn't charged with robbery. But he was charged for violating gun control laws. Beckett posted $2,500 for bail, and he was released from jail. After he was released, Beckett, his wife, and their 3-year-old son fled to Mexico. In Tampico, Mexico, Beckett cashed 3 fake checks, and then the family left the city. The Mexican police tracked them to Ciudad Victoria. When the chief of police in Ciudad Victoria went to question them at their hotel room, Beckett, his wife, and his son tried to run away. The chief caught them, and Beckett opened fire on him. This led to a gunfight between Beckett and the chief, and at least 20 shots were exchanged. The family managed to get into their car, and they drove off. No one was hurt in the gunfight. 25 miles away from the scene of the shooting, the family got a flat tire. The police arrested Beckett without further incident. Beckett was sentenced to 1 year in prison in Mexico, and he ended up serving 4 months. He then went back to Los Angeles, and he was given probation on the weapons charge. In December 1964, Beckett got into an argument with his 14-year-old stepdaughter, Susan. Beckett wanted to use the phone, and Susan would not let him. So Beckett swore at her and pulled her hair. During another fight that same month, Beckett hit Susan over the head with a crutch. Beckett was arrested and charged with battery. He pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, and he was sentenced to 3 years probation. Not long after he was sentenced, he attempted suicide by swallowing 30 sleeping pills. He was rushed to the hospital, and he survived. 3 years later, Beckett, who was 38 years old, checked himself into a nursing home in Los Angeles. He checked himself into the home because he had just suffered a severe beating. Who beat him up and why they beat him up is a mystery to this day. However, it's suspected that he was beat over a drug deal gone bad. 2 days after Beckett checked into the nursing home, the 38-year-old former child actor was found dead in his room. It was thought that he died after purposely overdosing on barbiturates. Another possibility is that he died as a result of the wounds he suffered when he was beat up. But an autopsy was performed, and no cause of death could be determined. Sadly, not even the dog actors from the R Gang films were immune from the supposed curse. The first dog to play Pete the Pup was a dog named Pal the Wonder Dog. Pal was an American Pit Bull Terrier owned by dog trainer Harry Lucinari. Before Pal was featured in the R Gang films, he was in a series of Buster Brown films. Pal naturally had a nearly full circle of dark fur around his right eye. For the Buster Brown films, dye was used to make it a complete circle. When Pal came to work on the R Gang films, he still had dye around his right eye. Roach did not want him to have a circle around his eye, but there was nothing that could be done because the dye was permanent. But it turned out to be a benefit because it made the character Pete the Pup one of the most recognizable dogs in film history. Pal was an incredibly popular part of the film series. He started off being paid $125 a week, and then it was increased by $25 every week. This made him the second highest paid actor on the show. But then, in June 1930, Pal the Wonder Dog died. It turned out that he was fed some poisoned meat. Whoever poisoned Pal was never identified. There is speculation that the dog was killed because someone had a grudge against his owner, Harry Lucinari. But since the killer was never caught, it's unclear what his or her motive was. After Pal died, one of his offspring, Pete, took his place. Pete lacked his father's signature circle around the eye. So legendary makeup artist Max Factor would draw a circle around Pete's eye. While Pal's circle was around his right eye, Factor would draw a circle around Pete's left eye so that they were mirror images of each other. Pete's owner, Harry Lucinari, was fired in 1932, so Pete left the show. After Pete, the studio used a variety of dogs to replace him. When the series came to an end in 1944, one of the dogs was given to an employee of the studio, E.R. Lloyd. Lloyd ended up giving the dog to his daughter and her family, the Robertsons, who lived in Norco, California. The dog, who was also an American Pit Bull Terrier named Pete, was a friendly dog, and the family thought of him as a family member. The youngest child in the family learned to walk by holding on to Pete. In April 1946, the family found Pete dead just a few feet from their back door. He had been shot once with a buckshot. They had no idea who shot him or why someone would commit such a senseless crime. The most recent crime connected to the supposed curse involves a man who was born Michael James Gubatasi. Michael was born in 1933 to James and Elizabeth Gubatasi in Nutley, New Jersey. From a young age, his parents called him Mickey. James and Elizabeth desperately wanted Mickey and his older brother and older sister to get into the movie business. When Mickey was a toddler, his family relocated to Los Angeles, California. Elizabeth took her kids around to auditions, and in 1939, when Mickey was 5, he landed an uncredited role in the movie Bridal Suite. That same year, he got a role on the R Gang film series. Between 1939 and 1944, Mickey, whose character name was also Mickey, appeared in 40 Our Gang films. In 1942, producers of the show suggested that Mickey should get a new stage name, so he took on the name Bobby Blake. The Our Gang film series came to an end in 1944, and Mickey was the last main character of the series. After Our Gang, Blake continued to get film work. While Blake had a fairly successful career, he said that his home life was a horror story growing up. He said that both his mother and father physically and emotionally abused him. He said that sometimes they would lock him in a closet and leave him there all day. Other times they made him eat food off the floor. In 1950, Blake was drafted into the Army and he did a short stint. In 1956, he started using the stage name Robert Blake. That same year, his dad died by suicide. Blake continued to get sporadic roles, but he wasn't considered a movie star or a television star. Then in 1967, he got a role that launched him into stardom. It was playing real-life mass murderer Perry Smith in the adaptation of Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. In Cold Blood is widely considered the first true crime book ever written. The book and the movie are about the murders of the 4 members of the Clutter family who were killed on November 15, 1959 in their home in Holcomb, Kansas. Perry Smith and his partner, Richard Hickok, were arrested, convicted, and executed for the crime. The movie was a hit, and it led to more roles for Blake. In 1975, the television show Beretta debuted on ABC. Blake starred in the show as Tony Beretta, a plainclothes, tough-talking detective with a pet cockatoo named Fred. He often used catchphrases, which included, "If you can't do the time, don't do the crime." The show was popular, and in 1975, Blake won an Emmy for the role. This was followed by a Golden Globe in 1976. Beretta lasted for 3 seasons. Beretta is considered Blake's best-known role. In 1993, Blake played another mass murderer. He played John List in the made-for-TV movie Judgment Day, The John List Story. In November 1971, List shot to death his mother, his wife, and his 3 children. He then fled and assumed a new identity. He stayed on the lam for 18 years, and then he was arrested in June 1989 after America's Most Wanted did a segment on him and one of his neighbors recognized him. For the role, Blake was once again nominated for an Emmy, but he did not win. In 1997, Blake had a notable role in David Lynch's cult classic, Lost Highway. He played a character only known as the Mystery Man. At that point in his life, Blake only took roles that interested him. He was frugal, and he invested his money wisely, so he was quite wealthy. At the end of August 1998, Blake, who was nearly 65, met 42-year-old Bonnie Lee Bakley at a jazz club in Los Angeles. Blakely started flirting with Blake. They talked about the fact that they were both born in New Jersey. Blake went back to her hotel room that night, and it was the start of a romantic relationship. Bakley had moved out to California in 1995, shortly after Dean Martin died. Before moving there, Bakley had been living in Memphis, Tennessee. She had been making frequent trips to Los Angeles because she was stalking Dean Martin. She was hoping to become Martin's mistress and then inherit all his money. But the furthest she got with Martin was a photo with him. During her trips to Los Angeles, she fell in love with the city, so she moved there. Bakley was described as a grifter and a thief. She made her money by selling nude photos of herself and other women through ads she placed in swingers magazines. She also ran Lonely Heart scams. She would meet men through personal ads and correspond with them. She would promise them sex in exchange for money and gifts, but she would never meet up with the men. She would reroute the men's checks, like from Social Security, and then cash them herself. By the time she met Blake, she had been married at least 9 times. Many times she married the men because they were rich or they had a big life insurance policy. Bakley's big dream was marrying a celebrity. This led her to stalk Dean Martin. When Bakley met Blake, she was pursuing another man, Christian Brando. Christian was the son of actors Marlon Brando and Anna Kashfa. In May 1990, Christian shot his half-sister's boyfriend to death in their father's Mulholland Drive home. Christian pleaded guilty to manslaughter, and he was released from prison in 1996 after serving about 5 years in prison. Bakley told her friends that sometimes Christian had paranoid delusions. Throughout 1998 and early 1999, Bakley took a fertility drug and had unprotected sex with both Christian and Blake. At the end of summer 1999, she was pregnant. Because of the timing, she was sure that it was Blake's baby, and she told him he was going to be a father. Blake was adamant that he did not want her to go through with the pregnancy. Bakley refused to consider putting an end to the pregnancy. Being impregnated by a celebrity was exactly what she wanted. She also told Christian Brando that he was the father, even though she knew that wasn't possible. On June 2, 2000, Bakley gave birth to a daughter. She named her Kristen Shannon Brando. Bakley named her this, even though she knew the baby was Blake's. Most people who saw the baby could tell she was Blake's daughter because of the resemblance. Bakley gave birth in Arkansas because at the time she was serving a probation term there. In February 1996, shortly after she moved to California, she was driving through Arkansas and she was pulled over for running a stop sign. The police asked for some ID, and 7 driver's licenses with different aliases on them fell out of her purse. The officers searched her purse and her car and found 5 Social Security cards and 16 credit cards. They all had different names on them. Bakley was arrested and she went to trial 17 months later. In February 1998, she was sentenced to 3 years of probation. One of the terms of her probation was that she was not supposed to leave Arkansas. The only exception was that she was allowed to go to Memphis, Tennessee to see her 3 children. But Bakley didn't follow the rules of her probation, and she traveled to California frequently. She was on probation when she met Christian Brando and Robert Blake. After Bakley gave birth, she violated the terms of her probation, and she and the baby traveled to Los Angeles to meet Blake. In Los Angeles, she and Blake went to a cafe while the baby stayed with a nanny. As they were eating, 2 police officers showed up to arrest Bakley for violating the terms of her probation. The officers made a deal with Bakley. They told her they wouldn't arrest her if she flew back to Arkansas right away. Bakley agreed, and Blake said he would take care of the baby. It turned out that Bakley's probation officer had no idea she wasn't in Arkansas. Also, the police officers who threatened to arrest her weren't real police officers. They were just actors. It was all a setup by Blake to get the baby. Bakley threatened to charge Blake with kidnapping. This worried Blake, so he asked Bakley what he could do to make sure she didn't go to the police. Bakley said she wanted to get married. Blake agreed, and they were wed in a private ceremony in November 2000. 6 months later, she finished her probation term and she moved into the guest house on Blake's property. Even though they were married, they never lived in the same house. The baby's name was changed to Rose Lenore Sophia Blake. On May 4th, 2001, several weeks after Bakley moved into Blake's guest house, Blake asked her to go out for dinner. She agreed, and they went out to one of Blake's favorite restaurants. It was an Italian restaurant that had a dish named after Blake. After they ate, they walked to Blake's car, which was parked half a block from the restaurant. About 20 minutes after they left the restaurant, Blake started banging on the doors of homes close to where the car was parked. Blake was screaming that his wife had been shot. A man answered his door and he called 911. First responders found 44-year-old Biley Bakley dying from 2 gunshot wounds. She was sitting in the passenger seat of Blake's car. Her window was partially rolled down. This led the police to think that she was either killed while she was being robbed or she knew the shooter. She was alive when first responders got to the scene and she was rushed to the hospital. But she was pronounced dead not long after arriving at the hospital. The police brought Blake to the police station for questioning. Blake said that after dinner, they walked to his car. Blake said that he carried a revolver, and he said that he carried the gun for the benefit of Bakley. He said because of her past crimes of ripping off men, he thought people would want to hurt her. Blake said that he forgot his revolver at the restaurant, and he went back to get it. Bakley stayed in the car. Blake said when he came back, he found Bakley shot. The police found Blake's response and his story fairly odd. When Bakley was taken away in the ambulance, she was still alive, but while Blake was talking to the police, he didn't ask how she was doing. He also didn't ask questions like who would have killed her or did they arrest anyone. The police also thought that the way Blake responded to the shooting was odd. Bakley had a cell phone, yet Blake didn't use it to call 911. Calling 911 from the cell phone would have been the fastest way to get Bakley help. Instead, he went to several houses before he found someone who called 911. The police asked Blake to take a polygraph exam, and he refused. He said he was too upset. The police checked his hands for gunshot residue, but the results were inconclusive. The police were not able to determine if Blake really did leave his gun at the restaurant. No one saw him return to the restaurant after he paid the bill. His revolver was not the murder weapon. The police found the murder weapon in a dumpster near the car. It was a vintage 25 caliber handgun. It had been covered in oil, so no fingerprints were found on it. The morning after the murder, Blake's lawyer held a press conference where he bashed Bakley. He talked about her past crimes and her criminal record. Not long after Bakley was killed, two men went to the police and told them that Blake had approached them about killing his wife for money. Both men said they turned him down. The police were able to verify that Blake talked to the two men on the phone several times in the weeks before Bakley was killed. The police then talked to a man who was a lackey and occasional bodyguard of Blake's named Earl Caldwell. The police searched Caldwell's home and they found a handwritten list that included items like a crowbar, a rug, duct tape, and pool acid. The police thought it was a murder preparation list. One item on the list really caught the attention of the police. It said 25 auto. Bakley was shot with a vintage 25 caliber automatic handgun. Something else the police noted was that Caldwell was a vintage gun collector. Caldwell told the police that the list was items needed to do maintenance around Blake's property. He said that 25 auto was in regards to a car repair, and he showed the police a receipt from a garage. In April 2002, 11 months after the murder, Robert Blake and Earl Caldwell were arrested. Blake was charged with murder with special circumstances, 2 counts of solicitation of murder, and conspiracy to commit murder. Caldwell was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, but the charges were later dismissed. In December 2004, Blake's trial began. The prosecution argued that Blake killed Bakley because she had grifted him and trapped him in a loveless marriage. The defense argued that Bakley had ripped off a lot of men, so she had plenty of enemies who would want to kill her. The defense also said that one person who may have wanted to kill her was a man who already shot someone to death and went to prison for it, Christian Brando. The prosecution had the 2 men who said that Blake asked them to kill his wife testify. The defense showed evidence that both men used hard drugs and had a history of hallucinating. The defense also contended that the Los Angeles Police Department and the District Attorney's Office was still upset that O.J. Simpson was acquitted 8 years earlier. The acquittal was very embarrassing to the LAPD and the District Attorney's Office. As a result, they wanted a high-profile prosecution of a celebrity to redeem themselves. The trial lasted for 10 weeks. The jury deliberated for 35 hours. Robert Blake was found not guilty of murder and not guilty on 1 count of solicitation of murder. The jury was deadlocked on the other charges. Those charges were later dismissed. In a press conference after the trial, the district attorney did something rare and criticized the jury. He said the members of the jury were stupid. Blake spent nearly $10 million on his defense. Many people think that Blake killed Bakley, or at least arranged her murder, and he got away with it because he was rich and famous. After the trial, Bakley's 3 children from her previous relationships filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Blake. 8 months after Blake was acquitted of Bakley's murder, a jury found him financially responsible for her death. He was ordered to pay $30 million. The settlement was later lowered to $15 million. Blake has not had a film or television role since 1998's Lost Highway. He claims that he now lives in poverty. With so many tragedies connected to our gang and the Little Rascals, people are convinced that the curse is real. In 1973, the creator, Hal Roach, was asked if he believed the curse was real. He said, "Naturally, some got into trouble or had bad luck. They're the ones who made the headlines. But if you took 176 other kids and followed them through their lives, I believe you would find the same percentage of them having trouble later in life." Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos just like it. And don't forget to go to criminallylisted.com where you can suggest cases, buy merch, and find out about exclusive podcasts. But that is all for today. Thank you again for watching.